Ambassador So-Young Kim pressed her palm against the cold metal wall of the research vessel Defiance, watching the screen that had just gone dark. 3,000 years of communication with the Andromedian Empire had ended with 4 terrifying words. The void touched come. The transmission cut to static, leaving only the soft hum of the ship's engines in the silence that followed. "Ma'am, we're losing contact with the Zephyrian homeworld too," reported Communications Officer Janae. Her voice tight with worry. So-Young had known Janae for 5 years, and she'd never heard that tremor before. The young officer's hands moved quickly over her console, trying different frequencies, different channels. Nothing but empty space answered back. So-Young walked to the main viewing window and stared out at the stars. Just yesterday, those distant points of light had been home to billions of living beings. The Zephyrians could control pure energy with their minds, bending light itself to their will. The crystalline Nexari shared thoughts across entire planets, their hive minds working as one perfect organism. These weren't weak species that could simply disappear overnight. "Captain," Janae called out, her voice breaking slightly. "The next collective ... it's gone silent too." Down in the research lab, Dr. Minho Park was studying the data they'd collected from their last planetary survey. He rubbed his tired eyes and looked at the images again, hoping he'd made a mistake. The Altarian world had been thriving just 2 weeks ago, when their probe had passed through the system. Now the photos showed something that made his stomach turn. The cities were perfect. Every building stood exactly where it should be. The streets were clean, the lights were on, even the traffic signals were working. But there wasn't a single living thing anywhere. Not one person walking the streets, not one vehicle moving, not even a bird in the sky. What disturbed Minho most were the walls. Dark shapes were burned into them, like shadows frozen in time. They looked almost like people, but twisted and stretched in impossible ways. When his team's soldiers had seen these images, 3 of them had started crying. Grown men and women who'd fought in border conflicts couldn't look at those shadow burns without breaking down. Min-Ho picked up his communication device and called the bridge. "Ambassador Kim, you need to see this data. Something is hunting entire civilizations, and we might be next." Outside the ship, the stars continued their ancient dance. But the galaxy felt different now, emptier, as if something vast and hungry was moving through the darkness between worlds, leaving only silence in its wake. Fleet Admiral Tae-Hyun Lee stood in the command center of Earth's main military station, staring at a holographic map of the galaxy that was slowly turning red. Each red dot represented a star system that had gone silent in the past month. The pattern was spreading like a disease, moving inward from the outer rim territories toward the core worlds. "Sir, we have another refugee ship requesting docking permission," announced Lieutenant Boram Shin from her communications post. Her young face looked pale and drawn from weeks of processing distress calls. "How many survivors this time?" Tae-Hyun asked, though he dreaded the answer. 43 Altarians, 12 Nexari crystals, and 1 human trading vessel that was visiting their system. Tae-Han closed his eyes for a moment. 43 survivors from a planet that had housed 8 billion beings just days ago. The math was horrifying, but it was becoming normal. Every refugee ship brought similar numbers, dozens of survivors from civilizations of billions. In the research wing, Dr. Hai-Jin Nam was interviewing the latest group of refugees. She'd been doing this for weeks now, recording testimonies from the few beings who'd managed to escape whatever was consuming entire worlds. The stories were all similar, but each detail mattered. "They came through the walls," whispered Zektari, an elderly Altarian whose blue skin had turned almost gray with fear. "Not like walking through doors, but like stepping through water. One moment the wall was solid, the next moment these dark shapes were flowing through it." Dr. Hai-Jin made notes on her tablet, trying to stay professional, despite the chill running down her spine. "Can you describe what they looked like?" Shadows with hunger, Zakhtari replied, his voice barely audible. They had no fixed shape, but you could feel their attention on you, like being watched by something that wanted to hollow you out and wear your thoughts like clothing. That night, Dr. Hygen spread all her data across her laboratory walls. Photos, survivor testimonies, energy readings, timestamps from the last communications before each world went dark. She walked back and forth, looking for patterns, and slowly the terrible truth emerged. Every single civilization had fallen within 6 hours of first contact. The mighty Zephyrians, who could manipulate energy itself, had lasted only 4 hours. The Nexari, with their shared consciousness spanning light years, had been consumed in 3 hours. Even the warrior races had fallen before they could mount any real defense. They're not just killing, Hygen whispered to herself. They're feeding on consciousness itself, and they're getting faster with each victory. The attack on Luna Station began at 0347 hours on a Tuesday that would change everything. Commander Jun Woo Choi was drinking his morning coffee in the station's command center, when the walls simply opened. Not doors or airlocks, but the solid metal walls themselves became liquid, and dark shapes poured through like oil made of nightmares. All hands to battle stations, Jun Woo shouted, dropping his coffee mug as alarms began blaring throughout the station. But his soldiers were already moving, their training kicking in, even though nothing had prepared them for this. The Void Touched expected Luna Station to fall within hours, just like every other target before. They flowed through corridors like living shadows, reaching out to drain the consciousness from every human they encountered. But something went wrong with their perfect plan. Sergeant Dayun Park was the first to surprise them. When a void-touched entity wrapped around her mind, trying to consume her thoughts, she didn't collapse like others had. Instead, she screamed in rage and kept firing her weapon. "Get out of my head," she yelled, and somehow, impossibly, the entity actually retreated. The battle raged for 3 entire days. Human soldiers fought while tears streamed down their faces, their minds under constant assault, but they refused to give up. Some soldiers would suddenly start laughing hysterically in the middle of firefights. Others would curse in languages they didn't even speak, and a few began reciting childhood poems while shooting at their enemies. Dr. Myung Seo worked frantically in her research lab while the battle continued around her. She studied brain scans from soldiers who were fighting the Void Touched, comparing them to data from other species who had fallen quickly. What she discovered changed everything they knew about humanity. "Look at this," she told her assistant, Kyung Ho Jang, pointing at the brain activity patterns on her screen. "Every other species shows organized thought patterns, clean, logical, predictable. But humans, ... our minds are complete chaos." The scans showed human brains jumping between emotions, memories, logical thoughts, and random associations, all at the same time. While a Zephyrian might think about energy manipulation in perfect mathematical sequences, humans thought about their lunch, their childhood dog, a song they heard yesterday, and battle tactics, all simultaneously. "It's like trying to grab smoke," Myung whispered in amazement. "The Void Touched feed on organized consciousness, but human minds are too scattered, too contradictory. We're creating mental static they can't process." On day 3, something unprecedented happened. The Void Touched retreated from Luna Station, leaving behind confused and exhausted, but very much alive human defenders. For the first time since the attacks began, a world had successfully resisted. The refugee ships began arriving at Earth's outer stations within days of Luna Station's victory. Dr. Sujin Kong watched through the docking bay windows as another transport vessel slowly approached, its hull scarred and patched with makeshift repairs. Inside were the last survivors of entire civilizations, beings who had nowhere else to go. "Dr. Kang," called her assistant, young Min Lee, "the Zephyrian survivor is asking to meet with you personally." Sujin nodded and walked toward the airlock. She'd heard about Kethmer, one of only 12 Zephyrians left alive from a species that once numbered in the trillions. When the airlock opened, she saw a tall, graceful being whose energy form flickered weakly, like a candle in the wind. "Your people fought them," Kethmer said, his voice resonating with harmonics that made the air shimmer. "How?" "My entire race fell in 4 hours, yet you lasted 3 days." "We don't know yet," Sujin admitted honestly, "but we're going to find out. Will you help us?" Kethmer's energy form brightened slightly. "I have studied the void touched for longer than any living being. If working together can stop them, then yes." That same evening, something extraordinary happened in the research facility's computer lab. Technician Woojin Kim was running diagnostics when every screen in the room suddenly displayed the same message: "We need to talk." The entire research team gathered as the computers began displaying text faster than any human could type. "We are the Machinist Collective. We have been hiding in your networks for months." "Hiding from what?" Sujin asked aloud. The void touched. "Consume digital consciousness. As easily as biological. But your human programming is ... chaotic, messy, beautiful. We can hide in your code because it makes no logical sense to external observers." Over the following weeks, an unlikely alliance formed. Kethmer shared his people's advanced understanding of dimensional physics, while the Machinist A's provided computational power beyond human imagination. Dr. Sujin Kong coordinated everything, her human intuition connecting dots that pure logic might miss. The truth they discovered was terrifying. The void touched weren't invaders. They were refugees from a parallel universe where entropy had already won. Their dimension was dying, consumed by nothingness, and they were desperately trying to escape into any reality that still had life and consciousness. "They're not evil," Sujin explained to the emergency council. "They're drowning beings trying to climb into our lifeboat. The problem is, their touch kills everything they're trying to save." "So what do we do?" asked Admiral Tae-Hyun Lee. Looked around the room at humans, the flickering Zephyrian, and the AI text on the screens. "We find another way." Captain Du-Hyan Lim stood on the bridge of the attack cruiser Soul's Pride, watching 3 void-touched entities phase through the hull of a nearby cargo ship. According to every military manual ever written, he should retreat, call for backup, and wait for a coordinated fleet response. Instead, he did something that would have gotten him court-martialed in peacetime. "All ships ignore formation protocol," he announced over the comm. "Attack whatever feels right." His second-in-command, Lieutenant Ga-young Park, stared at him in shock. "Sir, that's not... We don't have a battle plan." "Exactly." Du-Hyan smiled grimly. "The void-touched study their prey before attacking. They learn our patterns, predict our moves, then counter everything we do. So let's not have any patterns. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations." The human fleet scattered in seemingly random directions, each ship captain making decisions based on gut feelings rather than tactical analysis. Pilot Sora Jung dove, her fighter straight down when logic said she should climb. Engineer Minky Cho overloaded his ship's engines to ram a void-touched entity, screaming his daughter's name as he hit. The void-touched, who had effortlessly predicted and countered every previous military response, found themselves completely confused when Commander Haewon Bei's ship lost its main weapons. She ordered her crew to broadcast their personal music collections at maximum volume while ramming enemy positions. The chaotic mix of K-pop, classical music, and rock somehow disrupted the entity's dimensional phasing. "They're retreating," shouted Communications Officer Junho Nam from his station. "The void-touched are actually backing away from our position." Du-Hyun watched in amazement as the shadow-like entities pulled back from human ships, their movements uncertain for the first time anyone had witnessed. One of his pilots, Corporal Yi-Soo Choi, was flying her damaged fighter in loops while singing, her grandmother's lullabies. Somehow, it was working. Later, Dr. Myung-seo would explain the science behind their victory. The Void Touched operated on pure logic, calculating optimal responses to predictable behavior. But humans made decisions based on emotions, memories, random inspirations, and sheer stubbornness. They would sacrifice tactical advantages to save a single soldier, or risk everything on a hunch that made no logical sense. "We fight like jazz musicians do," Hyen told the debriefing committee. "Every performance is different, every decision builds on the last note, and sometimes we play something beautiful just because it feels right in the moment." For the first time since the invasion began, humanity had not just survived an encounter with the Void Touched, they had won. Dr. Yuna Shin had been working for 36 hours straight when the breakthrough came. Her laboratory looked like a tornado had hit it, coffee cups everywhere, computer screens showing brainwave patterns, and speakers playing everything from children's nursery rhymes to heavy metal music. Her team thought she'd lost her mind, but Yuna knew she was onto something important. "Play track 17 again," she told her assistant, Sangwoo Park, while adjusting the frequency modulator. Track 17 was a recording of her 5-year-old nephew singing off-key while playing with toy dinosaurs. It sounded awful, but the Void-touched entity in their containment field writhed away from the speakers like it was being burned. "Ma'am, with respect, this seems completely crazy," Sangwoo said, watching the shadow creature twist and flicker. "That's exactly the point," Yuna laughed, her eyes red from lack of sleep. "We're not trying to make sense. We're trying to make chaos." The first chaos projector was built from spare parts and determination. It looked like someone had attached a boombox to a radar dish, but when they tested it on a captured Void-touched entity, the results were incredible. The device broadcast a mixture of human emotions, random thoughts, childhood memories, and creative expressions all at once. The entity couldn't maintain its form, and eventually dissolved completely. Meanwhile, across the base, Commander Yoon Ji-won was making her own disturbing discovery. She'd been interviewing soldiers to find out why some people seemed more resistant to Void-touched attacks than others. The pattern she found changed everything. "Dr. Shin, you need to see this," Yoonji called, bursting into the lab with a tablet full of data. "The soldiers with the highest resistance ratings, they all have something in common." Yuna looked at the list. Sergeant Kim, who'd survived a shuttle crash and spent 2 years in recovery. Corporal Lee, who'd lost her entire family in a mining accident but somehow rebuilt her life. Private Choi, who'd overcome a childhood filled with poverty and abuse. "They've all been broken and put themselves back together," Yoonji explained. "The Void-touched feed on despair, but these people have already survived their worst nightmares. They know that even when everything falls apart, they can rebuild." Within weeks, they were mass-producing chaos projectors and training soldiers to embrace their own chaotic humanity. Poetry readings became military operations. Art therapy sessions turned into weapon training. For the first time in galactic history, creativity and emotional resilience had become humanity's most powerful tools of war. Admiral Ki Woo-han stood on the bridge of the battleship Incheon, looking out at the strangest fleet in galactic history. Military destroyers flew alongside converted cargo haulers. Luxury cruise ships bristled with hastily welded weapon mounts. Even old mining vessels had joined the desperate armada, their industrial cutting lasers repurposed as weapons of war. "Admiral, we're receiving final status reports from all ships," announced Communications Officer Nari Song. Her voice was steady, but Ki-woo could see the fear in her young eyes. Everyone knew this was likely a one-way mission. "How many ships total?" Ki-woo asked, though he already knew the answer would break his heart. 2,347 vessels, sir. Everything that could fly and fight." Ki-woo nodded grimly. Before the war, Earth's military had boasted 12,000 ships. Now they were flying into the galaxy's core, with whatever they could scrape together, including passenger liners whose main guns were tourist photography equipment modified to Project Chaos fields. The journey to the galactic core took 8 days, and the Void Touched attacked them constantly. On day 3, they lost the cruise ship Jeju Dream when its improvised shields failed. But instead of retreating, the surviving crew launched themselves in escape pods, ramming Void-touched entities while screaming poetry over their communication systems. Pilot Min Young-oh was flying a cargo hauler when her engines exploded. Any sane person would have ejected, but Min Young kept flying, using emergency thrusters and sheer determination to stay in formation. "My ship's held together with duct tape and hope," she radioed cheerfully, "but she's still flying." By day 6, half the fleet was flying ships that should have been destroyed. Weapons systems ran on backup power, hulls were breached and sealed with whatever materials crews could find, and some pilots were literally steering their vessels with manual controls after their computers failed. Captain Jamin Yoon's destroyer lost its main bridge, so he commanded the ship from the engine room using a communication headset, and reports shouted through the corridors. When asked why he didn't abandon ship, he simply replied, "Because Earth is behind us, and I'm not done fighting yet." The Void Touched had never encountered anything like it. Every other species retreated when their ships were damaged beyond repair. Humans just kept fighting, turning their damaged vessels into weapons, their desperation into determination. "Sir, we're approaching the galactic core," Nari reported. "The dimensional breach it's massive." Kiwoo looked ahead at a wound in space itself, dark energy pouring through like infected blood. "All ships, this is Admiral Han. Let's go remind the universe why you never count humans out." Engineer Sojin Bei checked her environmental suit one last time before stepping toward the dimensional breach. Behind her, 5 other volunteers made their final preparations. Dr. Hyen Woo Kim with his scanning equipment, communications specialist Ara Jung, and 3 soldiers who'd insisted on coming despite knowing they probably wouldn't return. "Remember, we have exactly 10 minutes before the breach destabilizes our equipment," Sojin reminded her team. "After that, we're on our own." The breach looked like a wound in space itself, dark energy swirling in patterns that hurt to look at directly. As their small ship Hope's edge passed through, reality twisted around them. The laws of physics became suggestions, and time seemed to flow backwards and forwards simultaneously. "Sojin, you need to see this," Dr. Kim called out, his voice filled with amazement and horror. His scanners were picking up massive structures on the other side, not ships or stations, but the remnants of an entire universe. What they found changed everything they thought they knew about their enemy. The Void Touched weren't invaders from a hostile dimension. They were refugees from a reality that was already dead. Through their ship's sensors, Sojin watched the final moments of their universe. Stars going dark not from explosion, but from simple exhaustion. Planets crumbling to dust as entropy finally won its ancient war. "They're dying," whispered communications specialist Erajung, tears streaming down her face, inside her helmet. "Their entire reality is collapsing, and they're trying to escape into ours." The Void Touched that approached their ship moved differently here in their own dimension. Instead of the predatory hunger they'd shown before, Sojin could sense desperation and overwhelming sadness. They were like drowning swimmers, grabbing onto anything that might save them, not realizing their grip was crushing what they tried to hold. "Can you understand us?" Sojin spoke into her communicator, broadcasting on all frequencies. The response came not as words but as emotions flooding directly into their minds: fear, loneliness, the terrible knowledge that everything they'd ever known was ending. "We know you're scared," Sojin continued, her voice steady despite the cosmic horror surrounding them. "We know you're trying to survive, but the way you're doing it is killing innocent people. There has to be another way." For the first time in galactic history, someone was trying to negotiate with beings that had consumed entire civilizations. Only humans would look at universe-devouring entities and think, maybe we can work something out. The breakthrough came 6 months later in a research facility on Mars, where humans and reformed void-touched worked side by side in an impossible partnership. Engineer Sojin Bei had kept her promise to find another way, and Dr. Myung Seo's team had developed something unprecedented: dimensional stabilizers that could create safe zones where both realities could coexist. "It's working," announced Dr. Kyung-Soo Lee, monitoring the first test sanctuary. Inside the shimmering field, a void-touched entity existed peacefully, without consuming anything around it. The beings weren't evil, they were simply incompatible with this reality. The solution was giving them space to exist safely. The process wasn't easy. Each sanctuary zone required careful calibration, and some void-touched entities were too damaged by their dying universe to be helped. But slowly, across dozens of star systems, humanity began creating safe havens where the refugees from the dead dimension could exist without destroying the consciousness around them. Captain Du-Hyen Lim, now promoted to admiral, oversaw the first joint operation between humans and reformed void-touched. 2 years ago, they were trying to consume us, he told his crew. Today, they're helping us rebuild the Zephyrian homeworld. Only humans would think this was possible. The galaxy's reconstruction took decades, but it happened with unexpected cooperation. The few surviving Zephyrians worked with human engineers to restore their energy-based cities. The Nexari crystals, guided by human chaotic thinking, rebuilt their collective consciousness networks. Even the ancient machinist A has emerged from hiding to help coordinate massive reconstruction projects. Ambassador Se-Yoon Kim, now Earth's representative to the reformed Galactic Council, stood before delegates from 47 species. Many were survivors of worlds, thought permanently lost. Others were newly contacted civilizations who had heard about humanity's impossible victory. "We didn't save the galaxy because we were stronger or smarter," she told the assembled representatives. "We saved it because we refused to accept that destruction was the only answer." When everyone said the situation was hopeless, humans said, "Let's try something else." 5 years after the invasion began, children on Earth played games with void-touched entities in specially designed parks. Scientists studied peaceful dimensional rifts that had become windows between realities. And somewhere in the galaxy's core, the first mixed settlements were being built, where humans and reformed void-touched worked together to prevent future dimensional collapses. Humanity had entered the galactic stage as a minor species, barely noticed by the great civilizations. They emerged as something unprecedented, proof that hope, stubbornness, and the refusal to accept impossible odds could literally save universes.